tonight, a bleak employment outlook from the International Labour Organization. Even though economic recovery is on the horizon, the labour market crisis created by the pandemic is far from over. It estimates employment growth isn't enough to make up for the job losses until at least 2023. Now, this means global unemployment is expected to hit 5.7% next year, and that translates to an estimate of 205 million people without jobs. The sharp fall in jobs and working hours has resulted in a corresponding rise in poverty. With global unemployment rate at 6.5% last year, an additional 108 million workers worldwide are now categorized as poor or extremely poor. This means they and their families live on less than $3.20 per person per day. A global employment recovery is projected to accelerate in the second half of the year if the pandemic does not worsen, but it will be uneven due to unequal vaccine access. Vulnerable workers in the informal sectors, women and youth, they've already been hit harder, and the consequences could last for years. Well, joining us live is Stefan Kuhn from the International Labour Organization. Mr. Kuhn, which findings should governments address first?
This crisis has revealed widespread deficits in all areas of the world of work, so including a lack of jobs, a lack of social protection, access to social protection, but also in general conditions of work. The report argues that in order for a human-centered recovery to succeed, we need to tackle all of the areas. We cannot just focus on a few single areas.
Well, Mr. Kuhn, what are the key labour shifts, and how have job trends changed because of the pandemic?
The pandemic has indeed had a very heterogeneous impact across the world of work. So we can see that a number of sectors have been hit extremely hard, such as accommodation and food services. Currently, we don't really know yet in how far those shifts or those impacts will become permanent and will become permanent shifts, or in how far they will recover. However, what we can already see is a worrying shift, for instance, towards more self-employment away from wage and salaried employment. And here we are talking about self-employment in low and middle income countries, which is often taken up not because of the great business idea, but because of necessity for survival, which means the work that is being conducted is often not very productive, is of conditions of low quality and of low incomes. A second worrying shift that we have seen is a large drop of women out of the labor force. And years of progress towards more gender equality could be undone if these women will not come back into the labor force.
Your report estimates 100 million jobs will be lost this year. Could that figure change because some economies are reopening?
Our projections for the labor market recovery take into account the progress of vaccination campaigns and correspondingly the prospects for reopening of the economies across the world. But they also take into account the various fiscal spending measures. So indeed, between last year and this year, we actually project a very strong employment recovery with 100 million jobs being created. But given the big hit that the world economy and world labor markets took in 2020, that is not enough. And indeed, for this year, we still project a shortfall in working hours that corresponds to 100 million full-time jobs compared to a situation, a scenario where the crisis would not have happened.
And what's the employment outlook for middle and low-income countries?
Middle and low-income countries benefit much less from rapid vaccination campaigns, or almost not at all. And they also have much less access to broad fiscal stimulus measures. So those factors do not bode well for low and middle income countries. What's happening, though, is that because of the lack of social protection and income support, many people have to take up activities, as I mentioned before, in low productive self-employment. So low-income countries are expected to have an employment recovery that is slower than in high-income countries, but nevertheless, it will be. However, it will be of low productivity, and which does not help to reduce poverty figures in the end.
All right, thank you so much for that. Stefan Kuhn from the International Labour Organization.